Hey, welcome everybody to the latest episode of the Data Radio Show. The Data Radio Show 2.0, a little bit different to what we've done in the past. We're switching focus a little bit to more kind of look into areas around education and the sort of roles that you might be able to find within the data industry. I'm joined again by Sam, and today we're going to be sitting down and having a chat about a piece of research that was done last year called How Will Language Modelers like ChatGPT Affect Occupations and Industries, which was written by NYU Stern and Wharton in March of 2023. And this is a really fascinating thing because while this is an industry that's seen a lot of change, the kind of research findings that came out still hold up really, really well. The way that they did their research piece, the methodology that they used was they developed a methodology called AI occupational exposure, or AIOE, to assess the extent to which occupations, industries, and geographies are exposed to advances in AI language modeling capabilities. This methodology involved mapping 10 areas of AI advancement to 52 abilities used in occupations and then cross-referencing them with data from the US Department of Labor's ONET to examine the importance and prevalence of each ability over 800 occupations. So this is where I'm going to bring Sam in and ask him a really difficult question. What were the key findings of this research piece?
Yeah, I guess the top occupations that were exposed, there's probably no surprises around the idea that telemarketers are likely to be the most exposed. But the most interesting one was post-secondary teachers, particularly those in English language and literature, foreign language, literature and history. Yeah, quite a curious finding. Of the industries exposed by this, legal services, securities, commodities, and investments, uh, they seem to be the ones where there's the most opportunity for automation of existing services like filling in contracts, if you like, filling in securities and commodities paperwork, managing investments, etc. Um, Interestingly enough, the quite perplexing thing about this, for some anyway, is that jobs with higher wages are likely to be more exposed to rapid advances in technology like ChatGPT. And arguably, we're already seeing something like that unfold, in that there has been a substantial downturn for people in the tech sector in North America in recent times. Those were high wage jobs, and they were the sorts of sought after occupations that seem to have reached something of a plateau. Not exactly sure why.
Is it something akin to what we saw with the dot-com bubble in the late 90s, early 2000s? And it was sort of reached a changing of technologies, and so those roles aren't necessarily the same as they were before, that the impact that they had isn't the same as before?
Um, there's definitely an aspect where there are a lot of parallels to the dot-com bubble of the early 2000s, and actually having lived through that in the Silicon Valley, there are definitely a number of warning signs that I'm seeing in terms of things being overhyped. The question, though, is if generative AI is going to be as significant as people um, can see it being, then the hype is perhaps not overstated. Or the hype is real, but it is being overstated, is probably a better way of putting it. Does that mean that the bubble is likely to burst? It's quite possible. And one thing that I would say is that when it bursts, is very, it is practically impossible to predict. And what a correction means is also a very difficult thing to figure out. I guess the key takeaway from my perspective is if AI or generative AI is going to be as pervasive as electricity was 100 years ago, it's not going away. So, in terms of a bubble bursting, it doesn't mean that there won't be electricity anymore, and therefore there won't be AI. You're just going to see a correction in the manner and fashion in which people use it and apply it.
You mentioned some of those top industries that were exposed, like legal industries and legal services and securities. Legal services I kind of get because things are written into law, so there's a little bit of interpretation as to what a law might mean, for example, but generally speaking, there's some fairly solid guidelines. Should people be concerned about security, though? Personal security being fed into an AI device, into a large language model, in terms of things like how you invest your money in commodities, and does it is there a safety concern there that we should be worried about?
Um, Definitely. I mean, the uh, issue with large language models is that they are not databases. So whatever has been fed into them as training data can't be undone or deleted. So once there's a record of you in there, once it's ingested information that applies to you, it's quite it's not it is uh, not like you can delete the memory or the record of your work being in there. So this has significant implications in relation to copyright and breaches of copyright, and you're starting to see lawsuits around that. It does have significant issues in terms of privacy, and the best that organizations are able to deal with at the moment is really putting guide rails around it. So training the models not to answer questions that might pertain to trying to find personal information or something that might be used to track down personal information. Um, the the key thing to understand, certainly from a job perspective, is that it's mostly about augmentation of what it is that you're doing. So the human factor still has to be there. So if we take the legal profession as an example, researching case law um, uh, can save an enormous amount of time around a particular topic or subject. However, the way that these models are designed is that they are designed to guess what the answer is to a particular question that you put into it, which, for the purposes of researching case law, as an example, can lead to anomalous answers or misleading or what are commonly called hallucinations coming up. So, if anything, from an augmentation standpoint, you actually need to be sharper at your game than you were before to be able to spot discrepancies in the answers that you're getting back from generative AI large language models.
Do you think that's part of the reason for that correlation with higher wage jobs? Because you need to be much more aware of what could possibly go wrong?
Well, I think you're likely to see a correction um, around that. I think corporations will use uh, generative AI as uh, an excuse, if you like, to lay off, uh, you know, sections of the workforce because you'll be able to improve processes using, substituting AI into those processes. Uh, so I think you're going to see quite a number of people find that their jobs are less relevant than before. And there is an opportunity in that, though, to reskill, upskill, become more uh, competent, if you like, and human in terms of your understanding of a particular subject matter area. So coming back to the example of the lawyer and completing contracts, yes, that's a task that is probably more likely to impact legal secretaries than necessarily lawyers. Um, uh, Having said that, there is going to be some substantial reduction in the amount of work that might be required for contract completion, but the risks associated with getting it wrong are too high to warrant just having a junior supervise that, if that makes sense.
Hmm. I've been talking to some people in the telecommunications industry this last week, and there's been a bit of a push there to bring in some sort of large language model to help them deal with their customer bases. The problem that they've got is that artificial intelligence can be beaten by human stupidity at almost any time. And so they're finding it really problematic to try and instigate any kind of large language model that's going to be able to impact um, them in a positive way. And I'm wondering what sort of implications are we looking at from this research piece that maybe people aren't necessarily aware of, or that should be at least aware of what could be the wider impact out there.
Yeah, I guess I like to bring it back to um, me as a person. How is it going to affect my life, my quality of life going forward? And that's a really good place to sort of step off into the discussion. So it's not just my opinion, but people like Scott Galloway, who's an NYU Stern um, uh, professor and author and podcaster. Uh, Medicine is one of those areas that you can see huge opportunity, especially interestingly enough, in the context that Scott Galloway talks about it, is in the North American model, or the US model, which is hugely overpriced. Um, you then contrast it with the public funded healthcare networks, which are hugely underinvested in and arguably um, need much better quality uh, outcomes applied to using public money essentially. So NHS being an example in particular, and probably the New Zealand healthcare system. What you have with generative AI is the opportunity for hyper personalized healthcare and treatment plans. Everything from diagnosis to treatment to adherence to a particular drug regime can all be enhanced by generative AI. That's going to not only improve the quality of our lives, but also the length of our lives. So, one significant implication of generative AI is our lifespans are very likely to increase. And so, too, is our productive lifespan. So, the old idea of retiring at 65 or 67, whatever the threshold is in your particular country, is going to be pushed out considerably. Babies born today can expect to have a 125-year lifespan. That's, yeah, quite different dynamics when you start to think about what we consider to be our productive lives and what becomes the norm, if you like. We are used to the idea of, on average, people dying at in their late 80s. if you live to be 90 today, you've had a good long life. Chances are that we're going to see 125-year-olds as the norm in about 100 years.
One of the things I love about this as well, with this particularly in medicine, is there are biases within the medical systems that we have at the moment that impact minorities far more than your average middle-aged white person. Having something hyper-personalized like this means you get rid of that bias because you're dealing with a patient on a one-on-one basis. So the implications on that alone is absolutely massive to see.
Yeah, and particularly around those things that affect minorities more than others, like heart disease, for instance. In the West, the two biggest killers that there are at the moment are cancer and Alzheimer's, dementia. Um, and one of the areas that uh, generative AI is having a huge impact is on the research side of things, being able to model, um, first of all, sequence genomes, second of all, model uh, drug trials as well. So I was listening to something recently where it's actually taken all of the data that there is around trials for a particular drug in rodents, and then it's modeled what a new drug might actually have on those rodents. So you don't actually have to um, put animals through unnecessary um, testing. You're going to actually test it in real life based on a model that more accurately predicts the efficacy of a particular drug or the effect that it's going to have. Um, yeah. So it's not only this idea of hyper personalization, it's it's throughout the whole sequence of things, from research to actual enactment, um, through to adherence. Simple things like reminding us to take a particular pill at a particular time, um, with at a particular dosage. Like, one of the things about uh, drug care regimes at the moment is that the actual prescription amount is based on the statistical norm. Uh, so, not you as an individual. So, some drugs have a much greater effect based on your DNA sequence, or whatever it happens to be, your height, your weight, your gender. This is another thing that is, when we talk about diversity and inclusion in medical care, um, most of the research and the standard human norm is male, not female. So basically, 48% of the population determines what happens to 52% of the population, um, which is hardly fair, relevant, or meaningful if you happen to be of a different gender.
Hmm. One of the other areas that I think this is going to work really well in is education. We're seeing some movements in parts of the world to a more standardized education technique being rolled out in our schools. But would this have an impact on education, being able to hyper personalize the way that people learn or the way that teachers teach?
Yeah, um, I think one of the things that we have been slow to recognize is the extent and degree of neurodiversity. That certainly when I was educated, in the 1970s and 1980s, um, you know, being neurodiverse in any way, shape, or form was just not something that could be accommodated within the school system. What we've gradually discovered, I suppose, is true over the the last 30 odd years is that there are actually a lot more different learning styles, a lot more neurodiversity in our population than we had any idea of 30 years ago. So, one of the things about generative AI is that you'll be able to, or teachers will be able to prepare lesson plans on the basis of you know, learning style uh, uh, and uh, the where someone lies in terms of that neurodiverse spectrum, if you like. I think one of the things that totally turned on its head last year, or 2022 in particular, was you know a teacher of critical thinking skills was just no longer able to set an essay topic. Um, and there are even stories that I heard recently of a Turkish student that was arrested for cheating in exams, basically using an LLM to answer questions. Uh, um, and you know, this is kind of an existential problem in terms of the way in which our education system has been designed, where it's not been possible to be able to, cheat in this fashion. And the the ironic thing is that the way that the models are designed, if they're designed to guess, or essentially designed to hallucinate, and you have a section of the population that can't tell the difference between fact and fiction, and truth and a lie, effectively, or truth and a guess is probably the best way of putting it. You actually have a major problem in terms of what the workforce of the future is going to be capable of. So, on one hand, there are huge challenges ahead of educators in terms of how do you uh, encourage and develop critical thinking skills using quite different methods to before. Um, but at the same time, you're going to also be able to accommodate a whole range of different learning styles like never before.
In terms of personalization, one of the things that we see now is streaming services, entertainment, how people go out and enjoy themselves. And people do it, they might be on the PlayStation, on their phone, on their laptop, desktop. Um, this, I'm guessing, is something that's going to have almost be a growth actually from where we are now. This seems to me like the most logical extension of how you'll be able to hyper personalize things through multimedia experiences with AI.
Yeah, without a doubt. I guess I look at this more from a production cost standpoint. And I guess there was no coincidence that the Screen Actors Guild went out on strike last year because they could see what was going on in the production um, process. Everything from pre production, script writing, script development, through to actual production in terms of using CGI, and you're looking at large language models now that can produce video like Sora. Um, Albeit a bit weird and creepy, some of the stuff that it produces at the moment, but you can see with movies like Indiana Jones, or the last Indiana Jones movie, and how Harrison Ford's image was used from all of the footage from the previous Indiana Jones movies that they had were ingested, and they could produce a lifelike replica of him um, acting in scenes, just using a CGI generated, much younger um, Indiana Jones. So you're seeing production costs in video, music, audio production, movie making, and gaming collapsed by as much as 70%. Now, I don't think that means less work for people. I think it means much more um, creative content. Like, I think you're going to see an explosion of content uh, as a consequence of this. Much of it will be rubbish, um, but some of it will be outstanding, and that will be the stuff that actually rises to the top, makes money, changes perspective, um, tells a story in a way that will be inspiring, and literally help us navigate this change from a storytelling standpoint. But
One of the
be
things I actually
prepared.
noticed this morning, I was going to say that put me out of a job. But no, one of the things I saw this morning, YouTube has actually upgraded its upload system and now allows people to use their built-in AI to create cover art for content that's going out. And I just thought, to create cover art takes a little time, and you might have templates that you're working with, but it still takes a little bit of effort to get it done. It's really fascinating to see how that would actually work, and I haven't tried it yet. I might give it a go a little bit later today, but I just thought it was really fascinating to see how a large language model that YouTube, the largest file sharing, video sharing site in the world, would incorporate all that information to build what they think is a more hyper personalized experience for the viewers of specific channels. I'm very curious to see how that kind of stuff is going to evolve as well, the peripheral to multimedia building.
I the I think one of the misnomers that there potentially is here is the belief that AI is going to replace human creativity. It absolutely is the opposite. Um, you know, every writer, journalist, author that I'm aware of that has played around with generative AI finds it actually pretty not very useful or um, pretty bad at drafting scripts. Um, where it's useful is in the research phase, gathering content, and where it's useful is in the editing stage. But from the point of view of original content production, you're just going to see it regurgitate or the large language models are going to regurgitate what it's guessing you want from it, and it is only based on what exists today, not based on a completely original idea.
No,
And
that
that's,
makes sense. So I'm not out of a job just yet.
yeah, I think it's kind of a different story when you're talking about, um, you know, fairy tales for kids and nursery rhymes. There, these are not particularly complex stories to tell. But if you're talking about, or if you're thinking that a large language model is going to be able to create a whole realm like Harry Potter, and replace the billion-dollar industry that is Harry Potter, um, that's not coming anytime soon, and I don't think that's likely to occur for decades, if ever.
Are there other limitations that you can think of, performance speed that we've got at the moment, for example, that might also impact the outcomes here?
I think the the biggest thing, if we're talking about an audience of data engineers, data analysts, and data science, is the difference between fact and fiction. You know, the truth lies in the data, but the fundamental thing about large language models is that they're not designed or built to find the truth. They're designed and built to guess an answer to a particular problem. And a particularly human quality is this idea of seeking the truth. So you're unlikely to be replaced shall we say, if your job centers around finding the truth in any given undertaking. And this is particularly important when it comes to the ingestion and discernment and development of insight in large data sets. Uh, Generative AI is going to help you build things, build a model, execute on a model, assist you in the analysis of data. It's hugely useful to be able to take a raw data set, just feed it into ChatGPT, and out the other end, it's produced a table for you, which you'd have to write some piece of Python code to be able to do it previously. So you're seeing all sorts of augmentations to the process that you're going through today, and significant efficiency gains, if you like, occurring as a consequence of that. But is it going to replace your ability to be able to? It won't replace something like a Kimball model. It's going to enable you to build a data warehouse using Kimball's methodology much more effectively. Likewise, if you're building a data warehouse using Data Vault and the Data Vault methodology, it's going to enable you to do that much faster. And there are also possibilities in terms of the analysis of information that's going to find patterns that humans would struggle to find otherwise. I think that's an area that is probably the strongest use case for generative AI in the data analyst space, in the data science space.
So, if people wanting to learn a little bit more about the sort of careers that are going to help shape the findings of this research into the future, what sort of areas do you think they need to be looking at?
Yeah, look, I think one of the areas that you're going to see it applied to in the short term is around coding, uh, and that's around new code, but also around legacy code. There are lots and lots of uh, COBOL programs out there, for instance, and Fortran programs that have never been modernized because they've just done the job just fine. We're talking about you know large swathes of pieces of code that aren't broken, so therefore don't necessarily need to be fixed. However, um, the programmers that built that code are either retired or they're potentially dead, or are most likely to be dead. And so you have the need to effectively modernize code. And large language models are actually really good at taking old code, seeing the structure and patterns in terms of how they were designed, and then producing it in uh, new form, new languages that are actually much more readily accessible. As a colleague of ours talks about, Shung from Tech Data, the new programming language is English. That's going to be what you find yourself doing. Prompt engineering is going to become a much more significant thing. So you're going to use prompt engineering for new code, legacy code, but also to supervise agents, or what they're calling agentic coding, um, which is where you have uh, large language model agents actually performing specific tasks and handing it off to another agent to check on it, iterate, they go backwards and forwards and potentially get checked by a supervising agent. There are plenty of predictions out there around this agentic model that you're going to see $1 billion corporation in the not too distant future that's got half a dozen employees. And it's going to be filled with agents, um, generative AI agents. So coding is one area. I think the other area that's most relevant to the practice of data engineering, data analysts, and data science is around modeling. And that's modeling scenarios, modeling failure, using things like digital twins to be able to model. There's now a digital twin of the Earth. So, from a climate science standpoint, uh, we're able to model different scenarios in terms of, if it's a zero point 0.1 degree warming of the world over this time period, how will it affect the weather patterns? That used to be the realm of supercomputer stuff, and that can now largely be performed by large language models. Another area which is particularly high risk, or where there's a high cost of failure associated with it, is in rocket science, of all things. So we'll be able to use models to model the functioning of rockets. So this is going to substantially improve our ability to explore space and exit the gravity of Earth, or of the Earth. So you're going to see a lot more application of models to figure out different scenarios where there is high risk to human beings, and high cost associated with producing something. And the example that I used earlier around rodent testing drugs in relation to rodents is a good example of where it's not necessarily cost, but certainly the risk. We don't necessarily value rodents quite the same way as human beings, but it means we can actually get that drug tested much quicker and get it into the human population much faster as a consequence. So we can save lives through modeling. I think there's two other
Yeah,
areas, maybe just to touch on. Or
sure. Yeah. What about communication? How do you think that's going to be impacted?
yeah, look, at the easiest way to view this is that we will be able to communicate as a species faster, better, and cheaper. Through the written word, through videos, voiceovers. What is known as content. Um, Everything from digital avatars or digital humans, uh, and music, and the production of pictures. You know, we're just scratching the surface at the moment from a communication standpoint, uh, in terms of the consumer market, but within businesses and enterprises communicating with each other, you know, again, we're just scratching the surface in terms of what becomes possible. I think the last area to maybe touch on is this area of composing things. And so coding kind of touches on this, but you'll be able to compose apps just with prompts. You're not going to need to, um, you know, even do prompt engineering. Arguably, you'll be able to actually build an app, um, or compose an app without any necessary coding skills. You'll be able to compose content. Certainly, I'm using that already in terms of image generation. Um, but one of the areas is in the drafting of policies and procedures. This is something that LLMs, much the same as, composing contracts. It's using a draft, modifying it for a specific set of circumstances. composing opinions on case law, and identifying precedents. There's a whole raft of different areas in terms of applications, content, policies, procedures, contracts, etc., where you're going to be able to use large language models in the next, like, this is something that's going to happen over the next 12 to 18 months. We'll look back on this in a year's time and it'll be like, oh, yeah, that's happened, that's happened, that's happened.
It's a scary pace, a very scary pace. But change has to happen. And if it happens quickly, then it's out of the way faster.
Yeah, I guess the opportunity is to see the glass as being half full rather than half empty.
Exactly. Yeah, and I have to say, when you talk about modeling, for some reason it came into my head a modeling program that I've come across recently on a social media platform where they've done a model of the world, like they've created a model of the world, and what would happen if you destroyed France, and just
What?
some different way that you could destroy it with an asteroid, you could destroy it with a giant water bomb. Just their whole mission is to destroy France and then move forward about 200,000 years in time to see what the impact is on the rest of the world. It's a fascinating, very weird model. I don't think the French like it, but he's built it really specifically for that one purpose, to destroy France. Very,
That's
very strange.
well, yes, the dystopian outcome could well be true.
I would rather, though, that he was destroying it in a model as opposed to doing it in real life. And I'm sure the French people think very much along the same lines.
Yes.
Brilliant.
All right.
Well, that's it for today. We are done and dusted. I've learned a ton. Thank you very much, Sam. I know you're heavily involved at the moment with the Data Pro newsletter, so we're going to encourage people to go and sign up to that, because that will be rolling out fairly soon. Working on all of the details for it, because that's going to be, I think, a really valuable tool for people as well to sort of be kept up to date with everything. Where can people hunt you down if they want to have a chat about things?
LinkedIn. I guess we can
Cool.
put the link in the description below, along with
Yep, link in the description below.
the reference to the paper that we were talking about at the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll make sure all of those are in the description there so that people can hunt it down. Again, thank you very much for joining me. And to everybody that's out there, don't forget to like, share, subscribe with the video, tell everybody about what's going on, and throw a comment down below as well. Until next time, have a fantastic week, and may the force be with you.